Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sandeen Lecture in the Humanities. We hope you are all as well and healthy as you could possibly be, given the truly crazy state of the world at the moment. I am Dr. Scott Hinkle. I'm the director of the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research, and it is my great joy to introduce you eventually, after a couple of introductions, to Dr. Cassie Russell, who will give this year's Sandeen Lecture in the Humanities. The title of Dr. Russell's lecture is Then Fight for It, The History of Alaskan Native Civil Rights. A few quick notes before we get to the other introductions. The Sandeen Lecture is named for Dr. Eric Sandeen, who I'll introduce in a moment, who is the founding director and now Director Emeritus of the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research. And the Sandeen Lecture is co-sponsored by the Humanities Research Institute and our friends at the Wyoming Humanities Council. The Sandeen Lecture takes place annually on the Monday of finals week during the fall semester every year, and it's a very special honor for us. The Humanities Institute runs a humanities research group in which every year 12 University of Wyoming faculty are selected to participate in a workshop where they work on their projects in progress, and those fellows vote on who among them gets to give this lecture. So the person who is chosen to give it is a special honor, and it's a recognition from their peers of their good work, and it's a showcase of some of the best humanities research at the University of Wyoming. A couple of technical notes. If you're new to Zoom, you can come up right around here probably for you. There's a button that says View, and you can toggle back and forth between gallery view and speaker view. And for tonight, because Dr. Russell will be on the screen mostly, I suggest you click on speaker view so he can be full screen for you. If you wish, you can type in a comment either in the chat or the Q&A function. If you type it into the chat, you can send the message to just the panelists, just the four of us here, or you can send it to all the panelists and all the attendees who are here, or you can come down and you have a button right around here somewhere that says Q&A, and that Q&A will come just to us who are on the panel here. A special welcome to all of the UW Honors undergraduate students who are with you. Dr. Russell will have the QR code for you to take a picture of or snap later on in his lecture, so please do look for that. If you want to keep in touch with us, you can send an email to humanities@uwyo.edu, and that'll get you on our mailing list. We also have a YouTube channel and a Facebook feed. You can follow us there, please. I will type all of that into the chat in just a moment. We welcome your questions and comments at any time, but Dr. Russell will give his lecture all the way through, and then when he's done, I'll come back and we'll moderate questions at that point. So we welcome your questions and comments, and that's how we will handle them this evening. Okay, great. I'm happy to welcome now Dr. Eric Sandeen.
Thank you, Scott. First of all, thank you to Scott and many others for keeping us wired during this unprecedented year. I've appreciated the many innovative opportunities to connect with you via Zoom, but I look forward to the day when we can actually get together, to convene, to meet. When WIRE first came together as an idea and then as a program with a faculty, meeting was important. We had dinners in the Cooper, lunches in the library, get-togethers after lectures. All were important to establishing us as a community. I think it's safe to say that there's a common yearning for sociability, right now offset by the invisible pandemic that makes us wary of each other and maybe a potential danger. In the coming months, it'll be important to consider how to reconvene to form a physical community once again. Some of this will feel like business as usual, and perhaps there'll be a renewed appetite for programs that draw us together. May they be fresh, exciting, and invigorating. But I hope too that we'll take special pleasure in the joys of serendipity. The chance meeting of a colleague near the library, say, that leads to a coffee or a beer. the open office door that beckons one inside. Particularly in these times of budget cuts and enervating demands from workaday life in the university, I hope that we can find some compensatory power in the community of humanists that we will form once again. Let's do that in creative ways that take advantage of the energy of reintroduction to a circle of friends and colleagues. So, see you in person at next year's lecture. Let's drink on that when we can do so together responsibly. And now, let me introduce Jose Chavez, who will introduce Caskey, our speaker tonight. Jose Chavez is an author and writing instructor. He holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Oregon, and in 2000 was a Fulbright scholar to Columbia, where he published a bilingual anthology of Latin American sudden fiction entitled The Book of Brevity. His translations have also been published in the Norton anthologies of Sudden Fiction Latino and Flash Fiction Forward. His own work has been published in the Atlanta Review, Rattle, and the Beloit College Review. He's currently working on a book of creative nonfiction entitled, Why is My Father Asleep in the Bathtub? Jose.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Sandeen. I'm honored to be one of 3 people that are introducing Professor Caskey Russell, thereby adding to the clout of this man. As an old friend of his from college, I just want to also say, in addition to his academic achievements, what a just great, genuine human being Caskey is. He has done a lot of things academically, written a book called Critical Race Matters, Education and Ideology, which is fantastic. But my personal favorite is a little known book that he wrote entitled The Jackass Chronicles, that is a thinly veiled roman à clef of his youthful hijinks. It is as yet to be published, but I guarantee you when that thing is published, the world will take note. The other thing I would like to say about Caskey is that he truly embodies the values of the scholarship that he undertakes. He deeply cares about fairness, truth, justice, and all the better angels of our humanity. And some of you may or may not know this about Caskey, but he's also a poet, a musician, a stand-up comedian, and a terrible boxer. But thankfully, due to his failures in boxing, we have him now as a speaker this evening. So without further ado, I would like to welcome everyone to hear this talk tonight from Dr. Professor Pillow Hands Russell.
Thank you very much. Wow, Jose, that was wonderful. Jose and I go a long way back, and I mean a very long way back. And yes, my boxing career was not illustrious. Maybe 13 fights and 13 losses, probably in the first round, not including a couple of times when I fled the ring, just decided I had enough. Anyways, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Scott. Thank you to Eric Sandeen. Thank you to my colleagues in the Wyoming Humanities Institute for the Humanities Research Fellowship Program. And again, thanks to my old friend, Jose Chavez. I appreciate you all being here today. Thanks everyone for coming. I have 4 parts to this lecture. And the first part is going to entail time travel the best we can via Zoom and PowerPoint. And then I'll do a bit of history, maybe read a little bit of the lecture. And then I want to tell you an untold story, and then time for Q&A at the end. So, and honor students, like Scott said, don't worry, I have the QR code at the very end of the my PowerPoint that you guys check out. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all, and we'll start. My name's Caskey Russell. I'm the Director of Native American and Indigenous Studies and Associate Professor in the Department of English at the University of Wyoming. The title of my paper, which we'll get to later, is called Then Fight for It, The History of Alaskan Native Civil Rights. I'm an enrolled member of the Tlingit tribe. And I always like this particular quote from Felix Conan. Cohen, sorry, he literally wrote the book on federal Indian law. It's called the Handbook of Federal Indian Law. He was a instrumental architect behind the Indian New Deal in the 1930s, lawyer for the Department of Interior. It says the gallant fight that the Alaskan Natives are waging today. Sorry, I'm gonna have to move the view of you all off of my screen so I can read this. Is a fight against racist principles that threaten all Americans. For the rights of each of us in a democracy can be no stronger than the rights of our weakest minority. I've always liked that quote, and I thought I'd open with it. And also open with a picture of Alaska superimposed on America. If you spent time in Alaska or know Alaskans, you know how proud they are about bragging about the size of Alaska. So there it is, superimposed on the United States. So let's time travel back to Alaska's past. There's a map of the traditional homelands of the indigenous people of Alaska. Down here in the southeast, which is known as the Panhandle, is Tlingit territory, where my mom's family comes from. So I want you to, I don't know if you guys have been on Zoom where they make you close your eyes and imagine something. You don't have to close your eyes and imagine anything. But let's imagine ourselves going back to Alaska. And where are we? When and where are we? Let's go back to February 8th, 1945 in Juneau, Alaska. All right, there's the beautiful Juneau. I took that picture a few years back. That's not from 1945. These pictures go back a bit longer, before 45. Anyways, there's signs across Alaskan businesses that state no Indians allowed, or we cater to white trade only, or no Indians, no dogs, all white help on the restaurant sign here. So previous to 1945, Jim Crow, segregation, racial discrimination, alive and well in Alaska. What are we doing? We are sitting in the back of the Senate chambers in the public gallery. That's this picture right here. This is the Alaskan Territorial Senate chambers, circa 1951 here. It was about the same in 1945. And in the back here, you can see up here in the corner, and where we're at is the public gallery. Public could watch the proceedings and hear the Senate debate, all right? And this is the Alaskan Territorial Legislature building, now the state capitol in Juneau there. Maybe you have been to it. We're listening to senators debate an anti-discrimination bill drawn up by two Tlingit Indians, Roy and Elizabeth Pratovich. There are 16 senators, all of them white men. The public gallery where we're sitting is packed with Alaskan Natives. This is a picture of Roy and Elizabeth Pratovich. They are the architects of an anti-discrimination bill that's being debated on the Senate floor in front of us. Their bill seeks to outlaw and penalize segregation and discrimination in public building, housing, and private businesses. They're sitting next to us in the public gallery. Since it's their bill, they're allowed to speak to the Senate. Roy is visibly nervous. Elizabeth is knitting. Rest assured, she can knit and she can still pay attention to the debate. Have we been in this building before? Yes, we were here 2 years ago in 1943. Roy and Elizabeth had introduced a similar anti-discrimination bill 2 years before 1945. In 1943, the bill was defeated by a vote of 9-7 after intense and heated debate on the floor of the Senate. The dissenting senators particularly disliked the fact that the bill would force local public schools to integrate. The 1945 bill does not contain the language about school and public school integration. Alaska's governors had encouraged the Peratroviches to leave that out of the bill because he thought integration too unrealistic a goal. So let's listen in to the debate. The Senate is debating the anti-discrimination bill, and the debate is not going well for the Natives. Memory of the bill's defeat 2 years ago haunts them. Roy is being personally addressed by a group of senators who oppose his bill. Let's listen in. Senator Tolbert Scott. Mixed breeds, I would love to use voices here, but I'm not very good at voices. Mixed breeds are a source of trouble. It is only they who wish to associate with the whites. It would have been better if the Eskimos had put up signs, no whites allowed. This issue is simply an effort to create political capital for some legislatures. Senator Collins. I'd like to speak in support of Senator Scott. It's the mixed breed who is not accepted by either race who causes trouble. I believe in racial pride. I don't think this bill will do either than arouse bitterness. Will do other than arouse bitterness, sorry. Senator Frank Whaley. I'm also against the Equal Rights Bill. I personally prefer not to have to sit next to these natives in the theater. Why? They smell bad. Senator Alan Shattuck. Mr. Pratovich, as I mentioned before, this bill will aggravate rather than allay the little feeling that now exists. Our native cultures have 10 centuries of white civilization to encompass in a few decades. Roy Peratrovich. Only an Indian can know how it feels to be discriminated against. Either you're for discrimination or you're against it, according to how you vote on this bill. We now see Elizabeth throw down her knitting, fed up with the racism of the pro-segregation senators, stand to let the Senate president know she intends to speak. Let's listen in to her part of the testimony, or part of her testimony, I should say. Senator Shattuck. This legislation is wrong. Rather than being brought together, the races should be kept further apart. Who are these people barely out of savagery who want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us? Elizabeth Pratovich. I would not have expected that I, whom barely out of savagery, would have to remind the gentleman with 5,000 years of recorded history behind them of our Bill of Rights. Senator Shattuck. Will this law eliminate discrimination? And we might be sitting in the gallery now next to Elizabeth and Roy and think, oh, that's a good question. Will this law that they're proposing, this bill that they proposed being debated on the Senate floor, eliminate racial discrimination? Very good question. What's Elizabeth's reply? Do your laws against larceny, rape, and murder prevent those crimes? I imagine the natives sitting by us in the packed gallery might be thinking something like, damn, you were owned, son, or some sort of 1945 equivalent. Then she goes on to say, no law will eliminate crimes, but at least you as legislators can assert to the world that you recognize the evil of the present situation and speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination. This super race attitude is wrong. According to people who were there, the public gallery, us, all around us, breaks out in wild applause. Senator Joe Green. Thank you, Ms. Pratovich. You may be seated. And I take that from the Dauenhower's famous book, Hakustia, Our Culture, and they took that from the Alaskan Senate record. What happens after Elizabeth's speech, you might ask? Her speech ends the debate. The Senate president calls for a vote on the bill. The Senate votes 11-5 in favor of the bill. The Pratoviches and all Alaskan Natives have been victorious. The Alaskan papers the next day write about the powerful speech from Elizabeth and how she ripped apart the super race theory. And there's the Daily Alaskan Empire the next day. The super race theory hit in hearing. Native sisterhood president hits at rights bill opposition. I'll talk about what the Alaskan Native sisterhood is in a second. Then what happened next? 8 days later, Roy and Elizabeth go to the governor's office, and the governor signs the Anti-Discrimination Bill into law. Then what happens? The discrimination bill becomes law in Alaska. Racial segregation and discrimination is banned in 1/5 of the US territory. That's the size of Alaska. Other such laws won't come into being federally until 1964. There's Article 1 of the bill. All citizens within the jurisdiction of the territory of Alaska shall be entitled to full and equal enjoyment of accommodations, advantages, facilities. Applicable and subject only to the conditions and limitations established by law and applicable alike to all citizens. The second article of the bill delineates the punishment and fines for those persons or businesses guilty of practicing or inciting discrimination or segregation. What happens, you might ask, the very night the Anti-Discrimination Bill is signed into law? After the signing, Roy and Elizabeth and their native friends dance the night away in the ballroom, the Baranoff Hotel. If you've been to Juneau, you've probably seen that right downtown. It had been a restricted hotel, but the no native signs had been taken down. All right. So that ends our time travel. I'm going to read a little bit about how this bill came to fruition. So bear with me. To understand how this bill became law nearly 20 years before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's helpful to examine the tribal backgrounds of the Pratoviches and the Native political organizations to which they belonged, and the situation Alaskan Native found themselves in at the turn of the 20th century. Alaska in the early 1800s, 1900s was seen by non-natives as a frontier of potential wealth. In American mythology, Alaska symbolized the Horatio Alger narrative writ large onto a new frontier. Poor white American men could travel to the gold fields of Alaska or into the interior or to the shores or the forests which teem with fish, furs, and timber, and with enough tenacity, masculinity, and a bit of luck, they become wealthy. In reality, the profits from the vast resources of Alaska, taken from the lands, forests, and seas stolen from Alaskan natives, usually ended up in the coffers of wealthy businessmen, mine owners, cannery owners, and lumber barons who resided outside Alaska. In both mythology and reality, Alaskan Native communities matter little. For Native people who had lived in Alaska from time immemorial, the late 1800s up through the 1950s was a prolonged period of colonization, cultural loss and destruction, racism and segregation, and the sustained erosion of tribal sovereignty. Jim Crow policies similar to those in the American South were common across Alaska during this era. As we saw, if one were to walk through the major towns of the early 20th century Alaska, one would find signs on restaurants, theaters, businesses, and public buildings that read, "All white help, no dogs, no natives, and we cater to white trade only." My grandmother, in her first visit to the town of Ketchikan when she was about 13, was kicked out of a store. The Alaskan drugstore owner yelled at her and her mother, "No, I don't want you stinking Siwashes in my store." A Siwash was a negative term, kind of a term for savage in Chinook jargon, but it became a racial slur against natives in Alaska. When I first came across, you guys might know the County Cullen poem incident. County Cullen, the well-known early Harlem Renaissance poet, Black poet. Check out his poem Incident. And when I read Incident for the first time, I thought of my grandmother's story, being kicked out of a drugstore and then going to a theater and having to sit in the native-only section. Alaskan Natives had no legal redress for such discrimination. The legal status of Alaskan Natives was tenuous. Robbed of their lands and resources and lacking the legal standing needed for redress within the US legal system, early Alaskan Native leaders focused their efforts on gaining citizenship and voting rights, which provide the legal footing needed to fight for civil and political rights. Citizenship was conferred to all American Indians in 1924, though in Alaska, it was conferred in 1915 if you could have 5 white people vouch for your level of civilization and say that you have left your tribal ways, your savage ways, quote unquote, savage ways behind. However, in 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act was passed, which secured voting rights for American Indians. Right after that, in 1925, the Alaskan Territorial Legislature, in a blatant attempt to prevent Alaskan Natives from voting, passed a law making literacy in English a prerequisite for voting, the classic literacy test. This was the Alaskan Native reality that Roy and Elizabeth were born into in the early part of the 20th century. And I wanted to show a couple photos of Roy and Elizabeth, not in kind of official poses. The one on the left is from my own personal collection from my grandmother. And Elizabeth sits on a beach with all of her friends in Klawock, Alaska. The one on the right is from the Ketchikan High School yearbook during Roy's senior year. After attending Chemawa Indian Boarding School in Oregon, and graduating from Ketchikan High, Roy, here on the right, attended Western College of Education, which is now Western Washington University. Elizabeth was attending the same college. Though Roy and Elizabeth had known each other in high school, their relationship blossomed at Western, and the two married in Bellingham, Washington in December 1931. Roy and Elizabeth eventually moved to the Tlingit village of Klawock, on the western coast of Prince of Wales Island in the early 1930s. Klawock was a natural choice. Roy had been born there, and Elizabeth had lived there for a short period in her youth. In Klawock, they involved themselves in local politics. Roy served as mayor for 4 terms, and the 2 main political organizations for Alaskan Natives, which at the time were dedicated to political and social change, the Alaskan Native Alaskan Native Brotherhood and Alaskan Native Sisterhood, Roy and Elizabeth got involved with those organizations. The picture on the right is the the logo for the Alaskan Native Brotherhood. And on the left, I got a picture of Elizabeth Pratovich, second from left there, when she was Grand President of the ANS, the same year that the Anti-Discrimination Bill was passed. No, let me go up, sorry, really quick. 2 slides to see Elizabeth here. Last year, the US Mint made a coin with Elizabeth Pratovich's likeness on it. So that came out last year. I'll go back down here. Sorry, I had to do that little aside. The Alaskan Native Brotherhood was founded in 1912. And it was derivative of certain groups or societies founded by Russian Orthodox priests in Alaska, all of which were assimilist in nature. As originally founded, the ANB had overtly assimilationist goals. Over time, however, due to the pressure of Tlingit activists, the ANB became a vehicle for Native justice. It was soon joined by its counterpart, the Alaskan Native Sisterhood. Both organizations became key players in the push for Alaskan Native rights in the 20th century. The Alaskan Native Brotherhood was also instrumental in electing the first Native Alaskan Territorial Legislature. His name was William Paul. There's his Tlingit name next to him. He was elected Alaskan Territorial Legislature in 1923. Paul is perhaps one of the most important figures in 20th century Tlingit history. Paul attended Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, graduated from Whitworth College in Washington State, and worked on a law degree through correspondence at LaSalle University. By 1920, he had passed the Alaskan bar, becoming the first Native lawyer in Alaska, and shortly thereafter was elected to the Territorial Legislature. Paul joined the Alaskan Native Brotherhood soon after its founding. He would become a major figure in the ANB throughout the early 20th century. He served as the Grand President of the Alaskan Native Brotherhood 5 times between 1920 and 1940. As a legislator and attorney familiar with legal aspects of politics, his influence was immense. Paul must be given credit for turning the ANB from an assimilationist organization into a politically active pro-Native rights organization, focusing the ANB towards issues of reclaiming Native property rights and ending school segregation. Paul was also a strong advocate for Native voting. The Native voting presence in Alaska was considerable, roughly 1/4 of the Alaskan population. Elections could be won or lost if the prospective candidate failed to court the Native vote. And if one wanted the Native vote, one had to court the Alaskan Native Brotherhood, or more precisely, one had to court Paul and get the ANB behind that. I mentioned in 1925, the Alaskan Territorial Legislature passed a literacy test. Paul came up with an ingenious way around that literacy test. First of all, he advocated anyone who had voted previously continue voting. He got that through. And then for Tlingits or Alaskan Natives who could not read English, he produced cardboard templates that could be placed on top of the voting ballot. Holes were cut out on the cardboard templates that allowed Natives to make their vote next to the pro-Native candidate, the one the Alaskan Native Brotherhood supported. So you can imagine Natives walking into the ballot, into the voting booth with these cardboard templates, putting them down on the ballot and voting, even though they couldn't read. They could say they could read, and there they could vote. With Paul's ability, through the authority of the ANB to influence large voting demographics, Alaska Natives influenced the outcomes of elections during the first half of the 20th century. In fact, the title of this lecture comes from William Paul. In 1923, during an Alaskan Native Brotherhood meeting, a Native Alaskan elder asked Paul, "Who owns this land?" Paul said, "We do." "Then fight for it," the Native elder told him. And fight for it he did. Paul should rightly be remembered as an advocate who struggles on behalf of Alaskan Native rights, setting an example for future leaders like the Peratroviches to follow. The Paul-controlled Alaskan Native Brotherhood eventually came to an end when the Pratoviches, Elizabeth Roy and his brother Frank wrested the reins of power from Paul. It caused a division in the ANB, and Paul and the Pratoviches would be enemies to the end of their lives. Still, the ANB and the Pratoviches, the ANB that the Pratoviches inherited from Paul became a powerful organization. In time, the Pratovich family wielded immense power in Alaskan politics. Roy served as Grand President of the ANB. Elizabeth served as Grand President of the ANS. And Frank Pratovich, Roy's older brother, served as an Alaskan Territorial Senator, and he eventually became the President of the Alaskan State Senate after statehood. I'll get a picture of him here. There he is. His Tlingit name is Snook. My older brother inherited that name from him. So he was born in 1895 in Kuyukwan. He told a fascinating story about going to, I accidentally hit stop sharing. Scott, can you still see my screen? Sorry about that.
I can still see it, yes.
Okay, great. That's all I need to thank you. He arrived at Chemawa Indian Boarding School on September 30th, 1911. He recalled in an interview shortly before he died that he was able to make it from Alaska to Seattle on a steamer, on a ship, but getting from Seattle to Salem, where the school was a bit difficult. They hung a sign around his neck that read something like Indian bound for Chemawa Indian School. And he was able to hitchhike from that time all the way down to Chemawa Indian School. He would go on to be one of the most influential politicians in Alaskan history. And as I said, he became a territorial senator, state senator, and the president of the Alaskan State Senate. He also was instrumental in drawing the Alaskan state constitution and making the push for statehood. I also have to show this next slide here. I can't help it. Frank Pratovich was one of the 4 horsemen of the legendary all-Indian football team, the Humanities Indians. He went to Oklahoma to finish up school. That's him pictured on the right at the boarding school in Chemawa. But he went to Haskell, and there he met Jim Thorpe, and that's Jim Thorpe, second from the right in this football picture. These other 2 are the Dix brothers, 2 other Alaskan Natives. So we have 3 Alaskan Natives and Jim Thorpe, and the legendary 4 horsemen of the all-Indian professional football team, the Humanities Indians. I just had to show that slide. In time, as I said, the Pratovich family wielded immense power, and discrimination, segregation became a focus of the Pratoviches and the Alaskan Native Brotherhood. So the Pratoviches moved to Juneau in 1940. Upon arriving in Juneau, they were denied housing in what was considered at that time the white part of Juneau. The move from the small, mostly Tlingit village of Kuyukwan to the large city exposed Roy and Elizabeth to other forms of blatant discrimination as well. They began to organize lobbying efforts, boycotting businesses that practiced discrimination. And in December 1930, as we can see here, Roy and Elizabeth, as the heads of ANS and ANB, wrote a letter to the Alaskan governor at the time. Like William Paul, they used the organizations as tools for political change. Notice the language in the letter. In the present emergency, World War II had just started. Our Native boys are being called upon to defend our beloved country, just as white boys. There's no distinction being made there. Yet when we try to patronize some businesses, we are told in most cases that Natives are not allowed. We were shocked when Jews were discriminated against in Germany. Stories were told of public places having signs, no Jews allowed. All freedom-loving people in our country were horrified at these reports, yet as being practiced in our own country. We as Indians consider this an outrage. We are the real natives of Alaska, by reason of our ancestors who have guarded these shores and woods for years past. We will still be here to guard our beloved country while hordes of uninterested whites will be fleeing south. You can see my little note at the bottom. Roy's and Elizabeth, the letter was prescient. In June 1942, many people don't know this, Japan invaded Alaska and took over 2 islands in the Aleutian chain. They also took 42 natives to an internment camp in Japan. 16 died. Not showed that one yet, sorry. Roy and Elizabeth found the governor a sympathetic listener who urged the Pratoviches to draft legislation prohibiting such discrimination. They drafted their first anti-discrimination bill in 1943, literally at their kitchen table. And the rest is history, as we saw. In reality, there's a large difference between the ideal of a law and the actual application of that law in everyday life. As Elizabeth stated in her debate with the senators, having a law in the books never precludes the crime. Discrimination against Alaskan Natives remained and still remains a major problem. However, the Anti-Discrimination Bill was an attempt to demand equality with an American society that wasn't ready for equality. As such, the bill was ahead of its time. As Alaskan Native leaders actively working to change the status quo of Alaska and permanently alter the trajectory of Alaskan Native history, Pratoviches are an integral part of American Indian history in the 20th century. All right, now I'm going to go into part 3, which is an untold story. And I'm going to read off these slides, and hopefully you guys can see them here. The history of Alaskan Native civil rights would look much different if it weren't for the woman sitting on the right. Her Tlingit name is Peratroviches. Her English name is Catherine Snook Scone Collins. She was known as Kitty, or Grandma Tecumseh, or simply Old Grandma. This picture was taken toward the end of her long life. She was born around 1836 and died in 1941. She was the matriarch of the Nastedi clan and the head of the Pratovich family in Kuyukwan, Alaska. Her leadership, based in Tlingit tradition, influenced her children and grandchildren who go on to shape Alaskan history. Roy and Frank Peratovich were her grandsons. They credited her with providing a living example of Tlingit leadership. Many of her children and grandchildren were active in Alaskan state politics at the village, city, and state levels. She was married 3 times, and today her descendants number in the hundreds. But there's more to her story. Got to go back to 1830. Smallpox ravaged Alaska in 1830. It was a 5-year epidemic that killed thousands of Alaskan Natives. 30 years later, it hit again. Smallpox struck again. Came up from San Francisco to Vancouver Island and then up to Alaska. One of the most devastated villages in the 1860s was Kuyukwan of the Kuyu Island in Southeast Alaska. Catherine, pictured below center, was born and raised at Kuyukwan. She was in her early 20s when smallpox struck her village. In the course of several months, hundreds of Kuyukwan Tlingits died, caught smallpox and died. In Catherine's village, only 14 or 15 people survived, mostly young children. Catherine was one of those survivors. Except for her younger brother, entire family perished. To stop the spread of the disease, a few remaining warriors in Catherine's village forced the sick and infected into a longhouse. They barricaded that longhouse and then set it on fire. Then they torched the entire village. The warriors placed Catherine and a group of children, including her brother, in a canoe and told them to leave Kuyu and never return. From the canoe, Catherine watched her village burn. Catherine and her brother and several other children paddled their canoe nearly 100 miles from the village on Kuyu Island to the Tlingit village of Klawak on another island known as Prince of Wales. They paddled into Klawak Bay and tried to land, but the Klawak Tlingits refused them entry for fear of smallpox. So they paddled north and found a deserted village where they spent a winter alone. Somehow they survived. In the spring, the Klawak Tlingits took them in. Catherine lived the rest of her life in Klawak. Though they attended boarding schools, I'm going back to the Pratoviches here. Though they attended boarding schools, the real seeds of leadership were instilled in Roy and Frank and Elizabeth by Tlingit leaders of previous generations, like Catherine, as well as grandfathers and clan leaders and warriors who have always been willing to organize in order to fight for their rights and properties. The Pratoviches would have known the last of the traditional warriors and clan leaders from the 1800s, warriors and leaders who had fought the Russians and knew Alaska before America. The Pratoviches, William Paul and the AMB looked back to a long history of Tlingit leaders, and by following their example, changed Alaskan Native history and indeed American history. So why do I tell you this untold story? Because Roy and Elizabeth are my great uncle and my great aunt. Because Catherine, pictured here, the smallpox survivor, is my great great grandmother. After seeing her family killed by disease and her village burned, she survived and lived to be over 100 years old. Because she survived, Roy was born and married Elizabeth. Because she survived, civil rights in America were forever changed. Because she survived, I am here to tell you her story. And because we are in a pandemic, and once again, it's hitting Native communities hard. But mostly, I tell you the story because Catherine's life shows that no life is worthless. Even though you may not be able to envision a future, doesn't mean the future is hopeless. Because sometimes surviving is enough to change the world. All right, and now I go to part 4, Q&A. But before I do the Q&A, I want to show you the gravestones of Roy and Elizabeth. They're next to each other in the cemetery at Juneau. And in 1988, the state of Alaska made the signing of the day, February 16th, the day they signed the Anti-Discrimination Bill, a state holiday. It's known as Elizabeth Pratovich Day. All right, I will, now for you honor students, that ends my, my lecture. Here's the QR code. Go ahead and get your pictures of that to prove that you were here. I'll hold it up for 20 or 30 seconds, and then we can get on to our Q&A.
It's amazing, Kasky. That is very moving. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Friends, we do invite your questions and comments. This would be the time where we would normally erupt in applause, but for Zoom, there's some applause, Kasky.
Sorry, I'm not sure what that's doing on there, even though they have a playoff game tonight. That's my bad.
Amazing.
I will stop sharing and we can commune.
Great. Great. So friends, yes, please type your questions and comments either into the chat if you want everybody to see them, or you can type them into the Q&A and they'll just come up to us panelists. A couple of them already. One note, Saul Neely writes to us, there's still a street named after Shattuck and Juneau. Maybe you knew that already, but there's one note. And while folks are typing, I see a couple people typing right now, please do. While they're typing, maybe I'll ask a first question and give people a little time to I love what that, I struggled to write it down exactly, so I don't have the language right. But Kasky, I love the idea. Something to the effect of, even though we can't see a future or see possibilities, doesn't mean that they won't become a reality at some point. I would just love to hear you talk maybe another minute or so about that while we have people type their comments and questions in, please.
So I heard the story, the smallpox story, growing up quite a bit. I thought a little bit about it when you're younger, but when we're younger, what do you know? And then as I got into University of Oregon and really kind of wanting to look into the history, I was trying to learn Tlingit language, which I still haven't learned, but I know some phrases. My grandmother was fluent in it, but she had passed when I was in graduate school. I went up to Alaska and interviewed people in the family. And so I got from a lot of the older people in my family, Clara Pratovich, Evelyn Adenzo, my grandmother and others, the story of Catherine's story. And then it really kind of hit me as I got older, how she saw her entire world destroyed and yet survived and moved to Kuyukwan. They didn't accept her at first, and but eventually they accepted her in, and Now, she had married a guy named John Pratovich, and there's her descendants number in the hundreds. The Pratovich family numbers in the thousands now. So yeah, even I'm sure, I never knew her. She, of course, died long before I was born. But I'm sure that was a bleak time, right? She couldn't see a future. And she was old enough almost to see the Civil Rights Bill, but she was old enough to see her family and her grandsons. Her son became a mayor, her grandsons become leaders in Alaskan politics. So it must have been an amazing thing at the age of 105. My grandmother said she still had full faculties. Her mind was still there. Her teeth, she had never eaten sugar. Her teeth were half gone because of not lost teeth. They were from 105 years of eating. They were only they were worn down halfway. And she couldn't see. She was blind, but her mind was still there at 105. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of questions. I don't know if I can get through all of these. Let's see. Yeah, there's Saul, my good buddy from Alaska, although he's moved to Washington now. Goodness, Chief Saul. Yeah, there's a lot of towns. There's names of people who worked, fought against natives. Here in Laramie, we have a lot of native Indian fighter streets, right? Pillow Hands Russell from Ken. From Shannon, was Canada ahead of Alaska in the US in civil rights granted in Alaska? I don't know, Shannon, I'm not sure of sorry to my friends, Julia and Ken. I don't know First Nations history very well. I know they banned the potlatch. They outright in all Canada banned Native ceremonies. I'm going through. Janice, was there ever a reservation system in Alaska? There's one reservation at Tsimshian Island and Annette Island. One of the things the Pratoviches fought against as the leaders of the AMB was the reservation system. The US tried to implement a reservation system in the 30s and 40s up in Alaska. And some natives were for it, the Pratoviches were against it. And I think it's an interesting long history, but there is one reservation. Eric asked about the Alaskan Native Claim Settlement Act. Oh, Eric, that is such a great question and a long question. So let me, good to see you, Eric, by the way. Let me tell you a little bit about preparing this presentation. I wrote about 25 pages and I cut it down to 7 so we could do the time travel part, and I could tell you a little bit about Catherine because I thought that was important. Stuff I didn't talk, and if you're a scholar of Alaskan Native Studies or Alaskan Native Civil Rights, you might be yelling at the screen right now saying, what about Tilly Paul and Charlie Jones, who were arrested early on for voting in 1920s? What about Nettie Jones's lawsuit against us, have her child go to a public school? Or Alberta Schenck, she sat in and was arrested. She sat in a white part of the theater in 1944. She kind of did what Rosa Parks did and refused to leave and was arrested for that. Uprisings and battles and fights for fishing rights, subsistence rights, the Alaskan Native Claim Settlement, the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, the Katie John settlement. All of these I had to cut out. So I did have a part on Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Impact the culture or civil rights advancement. Should Congress amend or repeal it? That's a long conversation, Eric. I'd love to chat with you about it. Yeah, I think unfortunately, it's a bit more than I can get into here. Yeah, sorry, Eric. I'd love to chat though. Let's chat. Good to see you, Hattie. Yeah, okay. Oh, trying to look at some questions. Jason Clark, good to see you, Jason. Can you say more about the principles of social equality as well as matriarchal leadership in Tlingit and or other Alaska Native societies? Reminds me of the women's leadership in Montgomery, Alabama, bus boycott. Oh, wow. That's a long, that's a great question, Jason. I like Alaskan Native Claims Settlement Act. It's a long answer. The Tlingit is a matrilineal tribe. So you belong to the clan, the house, the moiety. The tribe is divided into two halves, Raven and Eagle. You get your identity through the mother. So there's a matrilineal aspect, and there is a matriarchal aspect as well. Clan leaders like Catherine had a lot of power in society. And I know from chatting with my family and interviewing elders, everyone looked to Catherine as she was a midwife, she was a leader. She kind of embodied it all, the traditional kind of matriarch of a clan. And I think her leadership style had direct impact. I know it did. It had a direct impact on Roy and Frank and what they became later in life. So many questions. I could try to get to all of them, you guys. Deborah Nichols, what single book should I read over break? Oh, there are so many, Deborah. I got them all. What I could do is, why don't I put here's what I'll do. Why don't I put my email in the, because I would start with the Dallenhauer trilogy, and then also look for Fred Paul's biography, his father, William Paul, but also Window to the Land, Haycox's work. Why don't I put my email in the chat, and then email me, and I can give you more than you want. There's even a movie about Elizabeth Pratovich in the fight for civil rights. It's called, what is it called? For the Rights of All, Ending Jim Crow in Alaska. Here's my email. Feel free, you all, to email me with appropriate questions. There it is. All right. So my brother-in-law, Jack, thank you for coming. You talked about a moment where the Pratovich had compromised, make progress. Yeah, they compromised on the segregation of schools. What lessons should we take from that? Is it better for us to take on all or none approach, or a successive approximation approach? That's a great question, Jack. I think it depends on the particular situation you're in. They, the second time around, 1945, they wanted the schools to be desegregated. The Alaskan Native Brotherhood under Paul and then under the Pratoviches worked on school desegregation. And the governor convinced them to remove it from the bill. I don't know what kind of debate there was. I've never found that out, but I would imagine they weren't too happy about it. But they had to compromise to get the bill across. I don't know. I think in that situation, they had seen the previous year, or 2 years previous, 1943, 9-7, the senators voted against it. And that was the main sticking point. And I think they realized to get it passed this time, they would have to take it out, but it wasn't certain that would pass even with it taken out. And anyways, it did 11-5. Great question. You guys are asking such difficult questions. Fantastic. Ken says, I would not say Canada was ahead. Had residential schools, the equivalent of our boarding schools in the 20th century. Our history was not as overly violent, but devastating nonetheless. And there's a thank you, Julia, for the kind of the link to Indigenous suffrage in Canada. Todd Jolly, I haven't seen you in years. Great to see you. It's a privilege. Any advice for white educators on how to teach stories of trauma and tragedy in Indigenous history and reduce Indigenous people to victimhood? In other words, how can we best use education as a tool for furthering Native justice and avoiding tragic narratives? Oh, that's great, Todd. Yes, when the permanent victimization, victimhood kind of robs Natives of their agency and kind of humanity in a lot of ways. And it's something I often see in literature. And I think, Todd, I would say that by bringing in as much as you can Native voices, whether that's through literature, film, guest speakers, And as Ta-Nehisi Coates tells his son, in Between the World and Me, don't think of your ancestors who were slaves as a mass of humanity who paved the way for you to be here now. Recognize their individuality. He says maybe one didn't like her sister's loudness, or one had issues with her mother. Recognize that they're human. Each of these people are human, individual humans with dreams, desires, and goals, and not some sort of big kind of building block for the present, some point in the present. They had lives. Good to see you, Todd. And when were the schools ultimately desegregated, Kasky? So some school, it depended on the school, and up in the 60s, they were finally fully desegregated, Julia. But some schools, like Ketchikan High, did have natives go to them, even in the 30s. So the Pratoviches, Elizabeth and Roy, and my grandmother, and my grandmother's brothers graduated from Ketchikan High. Yeah. Scott, have I missed any questions that you can see? I see there's 3 on the question, 3 or 4. Ellen asked,
the Q&A.
Ellen asked, Alaskan public schools include Native history in the curriculum. Are our Native Indian language is taught? Yes, they are, Ellen. Thank you very much. That both at the college level, I know a friend of mine and a friend of Saul's, Kune, his name is Lance Twitchell. His Tlingit name is Kune. He's instrumental behind Tlingit language vitalization. Just won a big award in Alaska for the work he's done in language vitalization. They started an immersion school in Alaska. And the language itself is taught, Tlingit language, I'm thinking, is taught in college level, some high school levels. And you can take Tlingit online too through the University of Alaska Southeast. I've taken it myself a couple times online in my ongoing battle to learn the language. Great question. Mary Guthrie asked, what kinds of discriminations do Indigenous people experience today? Oh Lord, that's a a long answer. While there is no kind of de jure by the law legal discrimination, there's kind of a de facto segregation and discrimination, whether it's in public health, where they can live, overt racist acts. So if you're interested in Alaska, I can't speak to Alaska. So I grew up in Seattle. Actually, I've been to Alaska, but I've never lived in Alaska, believe it or not. And I've spent the last 16 years here in Wyoming. So the great question. And if you want interested in Alaska, discrimination in Alaska, I could point you to some people who could chat about it. But I'm not sure of the situation. I hear things, but I don't live in Alaska. Jordan Klopok, are the Pratovich family members mostly centralized in Alaska? Great question, Jordan. They're all over. Now, a lot of Pratoviches live in Alaska, but I have relatives in Indiana. Where else? California. By the way, Tlingit just became mayor of San Diego, by the way. Not a Pratovich, but that's kind of cool. Washington, Oregon, yeah. In I believe around 1988, 89, or 90, the Pratovich family hit 1,000 people. And my uncle, Stanley Pratovich, and his wife, Evelyn, kept the family tree. They passed away a few years back. So it's not being kept up. But it was amazing how many people came from Catherine and how many people came from the Pratovich family. Catherine and her 2 daughters, all kind of part of this large Pratovich family. Let's see. We got them all?
I do believe so, unless there's some we've both missed. A couple of people noted that they would also like this reading list. So we can think about some way to distribute it more broadly, maybe with the video of the lecture.
Sure, happy to. Scott, we can work on that, and I can give you a good reading list. More than can be done over break.
Amazing. And several people have typed links into the chat. Once this Zoom webinar ends, those links will go away. So if you're interested in them, you can click on them and open them on your computer now, so you can save them for afterwards. But we invite other questions and comments, folks, if you have them. Many compliments in the chat, Kasky, for an excellent talk, and it was an excellent talk. Thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. I'm happy to. I see that Saul posted a video. I can't seem to open the link, but that's all right. Whatever, my brother-in-law, Jack, whatever happened to all Kitty's husbands? Her first one was Johnny Scone. He passed away, and I can't remember how. And then Pratovich was a second one. He fell through the ice in Cloak Creek and perished. And then Tecumseh Collins was her third one. In fact, there was a picture of her in that apron. She was standing with her husband, Tecumseh. I can't remember how he passed away. Jack, I'll have to review the family, the family tree and family history to get back to you on that. Cool. I see a question from Laura. Can you speak about the roles of remembering and forgetting and archiving social justice, perhaps in respect to Catherine and her descendants? What a great question, Laura. I haven't thought much about the forgetting part, except that if someone doesn't make a note of it and write it down, it will be forgotten. So one of my goals that I have is to write the family history, the Pratovich family history, starting with Catherine and then going to, at least through not my side of the family. So my grandmother wrote a short memoir, about 80 pages. I got to get that published. It has a lot of the information in it, and some of the information that I brought today. And a number of the pictures I showed you today were my grandmother's private collection. They haven't been published. So I got to get those all put together, the pictures, the narrative, publish that. And then I have to do a lot of research on Catherine and her family, because with oral tradition, stories can be lost, family oral tradition and native oral tradition, right? It's easy. It takes one pandemic, one epidemic, and it's gone. So yeah, I have two other book projects, but third in line is the history, Catherine and her history and her descendants. So I can only speak for myself. I think those of us who have heard the stories, who know the stories, who have interviewed elders and talked with elders who passed down the stories, it's incumbent upon us to write them so that we don't forget them. And I think that I consider that aspect to fall under the large umbrella of social justice, remembering these stories from the margins, from the unheard voices. Yeah.
Excellent, Kasky. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for an excellent talk.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you, Eric. And thank you, Jose. I miss you, Jose.
Likewise, buddy.
Yeah. I'll see you soon. Vaccine willing. You and I will meet up with guitars and hijinks.
Great.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone. The video of this will be available probably in the next couple of days on the YouTube channel. So when it's up there, we'll send out a note. Please share it widely as you see fit. But thank you, Dr. Caskey Russell, this year's Sandeen Lecture in the Humanities.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all.